Welcome to Command Control Power, a weekly podcast hosted by 3 certified members of the Apple Consultants Network, drawing from over half a century of combined experience. We talk shop, interview vendors and colleagues, and share what we've learned while operating our technology consulting practices. Visit commandcontrolpower.com for show notes and click support to join our community for exclusive access to patron-only episodes, special features, merchandise, and other membership perks. This is Joe Saponari of CyMac, and my 2 co-hosts are Jerry Zigman of MacWorks and Sam Valencia of the HCS Technology Group. Thanks for listening. Welcome to Jason Dettbarn, the founder and CEO of Addigy. Thanks for coming back, Jason.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks for having me, Jerry, Sam.
Great to have you again. And the market is moving so fast. There's a lot of changes on a daily basis, it seems like, from Apple and coming down the pike with MDM and all. And we want to hear, of course, what's the latest in the world of Addigy, and then just kind of zoom out some other, bigger picture topics as well for the general interest. But what's going on in the world of Addigy?
Like you said, the market is moving pretty quickly. I was actually just thinking as we were starting this, we had a conversation internally where it was only a few years ago, call it 5 or 6 years ago, where almost every organization was predominantly Windows or network admins. There was no Apple dedicated admin. It was a pretty rare thing. And now you got most organizations really heavily looking into it and focusing on it overall. So, we're very excited to see the growth in the segment. For a lot of our revenue, a little over 60% of our revenue comes from IT providers like you guys that really focus on providing a managed service. And so we saw over 50% growth within their sector. And that's pretty astonishing. It is an area where, as we see more companies coming on board at an SMB level, the white glove service that they're going to get is through their MSPs. And so for us, we're betting on that segmentation of the market, as well as corporate IT, but they're not going to grow as quickly as the managed service providers that are focusing on the space.
Yeah, for sure. Well, since the last time we spoke with you on the air, Apple has essentially released Apple Business Essentials. And, there was a big conversation, let's say, among our colleagues about, what would happen when Apple Business Essentials came out and how they're kind of heavily marketing to some of our clients saying, hey, this is all you need. It's a few bucks a month and we just take care of everything. And on paper, but in practice, like you said, you don't get the white glove service that a lot of our clients really expect. And in practice, I've now had a chance to work with Apple Business Essentials and actually have it coexist really seamlessly with Addigy. So I think this is like another interesting vector here where Apple's introducing a lot of the smaller businesses to the concept of mobile device management and just consulting in general, maybe over-promising a little bit. Apple tends to under-promise typically, but the promises of Apple Business Essentials are pretty extensive. And I think what clients will find is they kind of get onboarded to the very basic light touch kind of management of Apple Business Essentials is that they may discover they have a need for more full featured solutions. So, I'm looking at that also being kind of an on-ramp to Addigy and other services as well. So that's been another recent change in that area.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. When Apple did acquire Fleetsmith, we knew it was really for the talent of the engineering and what they're doing there. So we're really happy to see Apple dig in on this. It's hard to remember that really MDM spec and everything that we were doing on the Apple side was reverse engineered on the agent portion of it, which still is a lot of the heavy lifting we do on the Mac. But on the MDM side, here's the spec, good luck. We report bugs. We never hear back on the bugs. You right. Literally, you ended up having to do a lot of black magic to figure out things that worked or didn't work. So over the last few months, some of the things that was temporarily broken and that was Apple fixing foundational things in MDM that were not working before. And so this is a good thing, right? This is us. Yep. This is going, okay, Apple's now digging in. They have a responsibility to not just put the spec out there, but make sure it works. That was an important change thus far, and that will continue. The other part is think about the amount of work that you guys have to do in educating a customer, as well as us as vendors. That's a lot of burden that's been on us. And Addigy specifically has a very large training team. It's picking up the slack where Apple's not able to provide that level of education and marketing. So we're seeing them literally decide, hey, we have to move this forward and get people on board. And we do feel that a lot of people will upgrade from that to a more powerful suite of products, i.e. Addigy or others. And so it's a really good thing for us. That training and education cost is a full burden on us. So I think you combine the two of them, it's fantastic for us.
It's so interesting that where you're describing that, Apple eating their own dog food, as the saying goes, with MDM actually now having that direct experience, like trying to implement an actual solution on top of the spec. It's much more efficient if the first party fixes the bugs that they have rather than the vendors like you poking and prodding, and it's a black box. We can send this command, that's the spec, and we're getting back garbage. Why? It's like, let's try sending this. Maybe that gets us a little closer to the solution, and that can just spin the wheels for I'm sure, days on end. And now Apple just waves their magic wand and says, oh, whoops, our bad. We had a bug in there, and now it's fixed. And so it just ends up working much better for everybody. So I agree. It's kind of strange how they were responsible for the spec, but other than Profile Manager, they really didn't have an implementation of it. How could they, go for so many years just like skating by like that?
Apple's told me this. What happens is every team that creates a new feature, they have to write the additional layer for MDM. So that's why there had been no consistency across it. So, I make a new feature for AirDrop or whatever it might be, right? Now I have to add the MDM settings and configuration for it. Is just always a little different and always had different flavors to it. It's getting more robust. This is what we need in the market. And they're putting their money to work on the marketing side. So one of the things that we've done too, and I think on the MSPs should really be aware of this, is MDM's also created a little bit of a friction point for moving. So if people are on, not necessarily business essentials, but they're on some legacy tool set overall, and obviously our MSPs want to consolidate, we have tools that we've built to seamlessly migrate them from those other tools, because that is a challenge. If I've got somebody on a different MDM, I don't want to break everything, and I don't want it to be a disruptive process for the end user. I've actually wrote an email to the executives in January out of a bit of frustration saying, look, guys, if you want a highly competitive environment of MDMs, you have to make it a really seamless environment to move from one to another, right? I think we've got the best product in the market, so we'll win that. But we don't want to leave organizations and users stuck. And that's one area. But we build a lot of tools to help MSPs move tools across.
That's actually pretty encouraging to hear. I mean, that's a major challenge that you're talking about right there, which is if an organization does decide to make a change, it's not easy. And depending on if it's a computer or mobile device too, that challenge can be completely different. So the fact that you're thinking of that piece of it and saying we need to build some kind of bridge between the two so that we can on-ramp people more easily, that benefits the end user and the MSP and potentially the internal IT person, but it also benefits you as an organization to make that transition smooth so people get a good feeling right out the gate.
Yeah, when we had agent only, when MDM wasn't necessary for a Mac, wasn't even an option, you weren't tying everything. The machine was in its given state. So if you changed platforms or you ran them even in parallel, the machine's always in a state. With MDM, when I remove MDM, I'm ripping out my Wi-Fi settings. I'm ripping out all these other things. So it's very disruptive. And so Field Guide IT was in our last innovation summit. Others were talking about this too, but they've used our migration tool pretty heavily and have moved, consolidated customers off of many different tool sets. So it's a challenge, and we want to really compete at the best level possible. So make it easy for everybody to find the best solution they need to and not be captive to it.
So just to drill down on that a little bit, my understanding is scope of like iOS, depending on how the device is enrolled, it may require erasing the device. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's accurate on the iOS side. On the Mac side, obviously not, but You're still having more and more things you start to tie to that MDM are then stateful to that MDM enrollment. That's a scary proposition for future scenarios. You got to really trust the vendor you're working with is really what it comes down to.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, because I guess what you're saying is like the MDM configuration profiles that get deployed along with the MDM enrollment, essentially, like you said, get ripped out when you're unenrolling, which is required to re-enroll in a different platform. So how do you deal with those settings and features and configurations and things that came along with the outgoing provider, manually re-implementing that, not to mention actually guiding users if there's no direct way.
Yeah, so it creates a stickier relationship, but that's not a very good thing for the end users. Just want to make it easy.
Yeah, like you said, the platform, the sort of ecosystem of all the various platform vendors that's the goal for everybody, or at least it should be.
Exactly.
I like what Jason said there in terms of the stickiness, because we have talked about this internally as well. Outside of the scope of MDM, just there's a way you can be sticky with your customers, and they have a lot of services that rely on you. But I don't love that feeling. Like, I don't want them to feel like I'm stuck to these guys. Everything that I do revolves around them. And if I move, it's going to be a major headache. That's kind of like just requiring them to be with you, even if it's an unhappy relationship. So I don't like that feeling. And your side of the coin as well, although that can force someone to be with you, that's not the relationship you want. I like the thought of where you're going with that in terms of your own space of saying we can make this so it can be seamless, even if it was to go the other direction away from us. We don't want it to, but we want it to be that there's this openness here that you should be with us because we're the best solution for you.
Yeah, Sam, this sounds like lip service to maybe some people, but you're spot on. Like, we have month to month only for obviously our IT providers, and we don't rope them into annual contracts because at the end of the day, if a customer wants to leave, you don't want them to feel captive in any shape or form, because that just creates a whole bunch of other scenarios that are negative for the business. I mean, let's look at the Datto to Kaseya announcement, if any of you guys track that stuff. That wasn't particularly well received, right? Part of this is just making sure that you want to keep positive network effects to what you're doing and everybody that's working in your environment. If not, if it don't hold people hostage for 10, 12 months or something like that. And the same goes to anything else we're doing.
I think that's a really good point. I mean, locking someone in to us as consultants just, kind of breeds resentment. Like, over time, if you're not providing a service that they really inherently want to stay with you, and you're locking them in just because of the approach that you take, like maybe including a bunch of services that get billed through us or whatever, maybe you're doing an okay job. Maybe they're happy for the first few years. Like, if they're not happy eventually, then, and they feel stuck, I mean, that's never going to go well. And they're certainly not going to part ways, amicably at that point and sing your praises to someone down the line. Why lock people in? I think we've discussed that before. And some of it is Apple's responsibility because they designed the spec, and individual vendors can only really work within those guidelines, but it's hard to explain that to a client sometimes. So the smoother you can make that process, the happier they are, and the less they feel like you need to lock them in, and the more they feel like they're there by their own will and because you're doing a good job.
Exactly. And confidence for us was tested during COVID when we had all month to month, and COVID hits us hard, and it hits the market hard, and I'm sitting here going, oh my gosh, what am I going to deal with? And it proved that we were always positive net expansion even through COVID, which was a huge sign. People could have nickel and dimed and taken down a lot of devices and cost us, but it just gave us a lot of confidence. One thing that we do, in the IT services world, I always like people to think about this a little bit. We, particularly at Addigy, we use some tools. We used to use PlanHat, now Gainsight, and we plumb it with product usage data, and it allows us to maintain customer health across the board. So put yourself in my shoes. If people don't log into the platform in a period of time, it's a huge red flag. More importantly, are they using the high valued areas of the solution? If they are, and you've got them finding ROI in it, you're in a good place. So we're constantly tracking that quote unquote customer health. So one thing we did early on, and I actually should double back down on this before, you guys do CSAT scores potentially with ticketing and others, but literally just asking the end user, how do you feel about your IT services today? And you take that poll once a month or so, and all they got to do is a thumbs up or thumbs down. It gives you a very clear indication, especially if you have historic numbers around that. So if somebody gave you a thumbs up for 6 months and then for some reason they gave you a thumbs down, you've got clear empirical information. And at the end of the day, it is all about the user's experience. We can manage these devices to the nth degree, but we care about how the end users feel. And obviously, as engineers, we kind of hate that feeling, but you got to be able to dial that in and think about it. And now you've got both. You've got sort of device health and device scenarios, and you've got user empirical, and you layer those in together, and now you're able to really track the satisfaction level, and especially act with intent as soon as it comes. I use this example very, very often. When I was getting married, a really close colleague of mine said, listen, as long as she's still talking to you, you're okay. Once she stops talking to you, that's when you got a real problem. So same thing in business.
That's when you got to send her a survey and say, how do we do?
Thumbs up, thumbs down.
Yeah, Jerry loves those 5-star surveys. They seem to like any interaction you have with a big company these days. It's like, how did we do? We've joked about it on the show, but I think there's a way to do this right, where exactly what you're describing, Jason. Like, you do need that user sentiment readout over time, and you need to be able to respond if there is an issue, if something is a downturn in an individual basis or a client basis or overall in your fleet or whatever. That stuff can be tracked and managed. I think the key thing is like how you ask, when you ask. You don't want to get in somebody's way. The worst thing is I open up an iOS app and I've got one thing I need to do quickly, and like the first thing I see is asking for a rating or something. It's like, that's not what I'm here for. What do you guys think, Jerry? Like, since you're the one that seems to have the most issue with those surveys, what would you do for your clients ideally? Like, would you ask in some way, or would you just not do this at all?
I think it has to do with how big your installed base is. If you run a pretty tight shop, I think usually we know. We don't have to necessarily send them a thumbs up or thumbs down, but I'm so glad it's there to be able to poll user sentiment, because it's a tool that I really don't take advantage of. But at the same time, it's only because I have a small installed base. So I feel like I've already read the temperature of most of my clients.
It reminds me of something we were talking about recently, just like going on site, versus not going on site, and the benefit of going on site sometimes, to a company that might have 5 users, 10 users, 20 users, is that, sometimes they see you and they're like, oh yeah, this thing's been bothering me. Like, I'm glad you're here. I get it on the phone a lot, obviously. I'm on the phone with somebody, we solve the 10-minute problem, and then they're like, while I have you, I wish this was on the list. I would have planned for it. You get that because it's like you're in front of them in some form. Sometimes you don't hear from people and you think no news is good news, but how do you find out how things are really going? It's a subtle art, I think. You don't want to ask them every day, jump up in front of their Zoom call with a pop-up, but I think maybe like upon restart could be a good time. I don't know.
It's a hard scenario because a lot of IT companies will moniker their value based on IT tickets. And that's, in my view, really, really bad, because you're just dealing with incidents, usually at a reactive level anyway, which can be really bad. I've created all these tickets. The only thing I could say is that I'm talking to you. I'm not, as that relationship goes. But like one of my partners out there, we do a lot of work with, and I'm trying to sell anybody on a new tool, but Cloud Radial built a dashboard and utility that really pulls together a bunch of information. You can build out project roadmaps in a longer term time frame where you're able to have that conversation that's hopefully higher valued than tickets, or you don't want the customers getting too used to you walking in the door either, because now you're conditioning them that is ongoing value that they expect too. So it's a really hard scenario. I use this one other analogy I think about quite often. It's kind of hard how often it could be used, but the Sands Hotel used to work very closely with a Harvard economist. They actually brought in as CEO. So they went from this model of, hey, you won a bunch of money, we're going to comp you hotels, we're going to take care of you in all these different ways. And he flipped that model on its head, because if you're winning money, you're coming back. It's the other side of it. So that's why you always have to use player cards these days more than ever before, because they can track how you're doing things. So just think, for example, you're up $20 at the beginning of your night, and you're there for 2 hours, and you're up $100 or something like that. You end $100 down at the very end of the night, versus somebody else that comes in and is down $100 for the whole 2 hour period and ends at $100 down. The same outcome. But that same journey right there, the person that was down for 2 hours will never walk in the casino ever again. 98% will never walk in it ever again. Those are the ones that they throw the comps at, and they do the things that they can do to help drive value and get them back in the door. And they measured all of this stuff because they can do that in that regard. It's always astonishing to me that the end result can be exactly the same. It's the value of that journey and how it's perceived. That's why taking that somewhat consistent temperature does give you that foundational point. You could have one person that's always giving you a thumbs down, and who cares? It's like, that's who they are, right?
That's the only way they get support. They know to give you a thumbs down, and you're going to give them a call like, "What's up?" It's like, "Oh, nothing."
But they're working, they're responding, they're so anyway.
Yeah, it's true. It's a measure. Yeah, either way, I know. I'm gonna revisit that, I think, because I've experimented a little bit with it, and I want to find like the right either time of day or. I mean, this is such a subtle art in general, is how to interact with end users. I mean, it sounds like I'm making something that's human more technical than it needs to be. But, we're interacting with humans on the other end of things, and we don't want to bother them. We're responsible for certain things. We're responsible for making sure their system is secure. And, that means forcing a certain device state or, updates, things like that. And we need to do those things when it's possible to do them. So like triggering an update, the system has to be on. But if the system's on, they're probably using it, a lot of the time. So it's like, how do we interact with users where we're doing our job, we're getting it done, but we have the least possible impact on them? One example is, when Addigy kicks off the Microsoft Office updates, it makes sure the apps aren't running, obviously. And so you just need to kind of instruct your users when you're finished with these apps, quit them. Or, you can script that. You can just have that run, if the system is idle, quit the apps. And then the next time Addigy checks the machine, it'll install the updates. So you can kind of do that with some of the behind the scenes stuff. But there's certain things that you do need a person to initiate, like a Mac OS update, for example. And you don't want to necessarily badger them about it, but you do have to kind of coax them along sometimes. Yeah, it can be kind of subtle. I kind of want someone to just like invent the all-encompassing script for this that would assess the state of the system, usage patterns, whatever, and like given a certain state of things, then just do the right thing. Make sure that the backup has recently run and the system is on and plugged into power and idle, not being used, and then run the Mac OS update or something like that.
I was literally just thinking about that as you were setting it up, was making sure that productivity tools are not running. Or I was just thinking about somebody opening up self-service. So if they enable the self-service utilities with Addigy or alike, when they open up that, they're actually interacting essentially with IT at that point, and then you could kind of give them a modal pop-up for that interaction point even before. In the end, there's clearly some disruption, but the flip side of it is you guys might be sitting there going, man, these customers must be happy. I haven't talked to them in 2 months. And it could be the other way around, where they've already just made a decision and if they're not talking to you, that's when you're in real trouble. So, right. Yeah.
Got to keep them talking for sure.
Taking the temperature of the customer, which as a company that specializes in remote, you're not on site like we might be. I have the opportunity at times to go on site, so I can have a little bit of best of both worlds there. But I also think about the people or end users that may not know why things like they're unhappy with something. Like they'll give you that thumbs down, that constant person that does that. But perhaps it's something that's not in our product's control or in Addigy's control. Like I've been thinking about some of the things that we've kicked around on this show in terms of software updates and how they're not that smooth anymore. But there's a lot out of the hands of MDM that manages how smooth a software update will go, depending if it's on silicon or if it was enrolled using automated device enrollment. And so these people, I guess what I'm getting at is these people may not know why they're unhappy at times. They want to blame something. So they're either going to blame us or the product. But that's the tough part, is explaining to them the why part of why something may not be working as they anticipate it should be,
Yeah, you're exactly right, because so many people have different experiences overall. I was at the MES conference a couple weeks ago. This is the mid-size enterprise summit, and there was a lot of companies that walk by and they look at our booth and they go, Apple, oh, I hate Apple. And they're Windows admins, and you guys don't, you think I'm exaggerating, but I'm not. It's visceral hate. And there's absolutely no real reasons why, or maybe it was 5 years ago, or maybe it was recent, but I completely hear what you're saying. And a lot of this stuff, you just need to make sure that you've got awareness of it, because it could be in your control, it could be out of your control, or it just could be, even something a little more empirical in the middle there, right?
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. It could be environmental. It could be a lot of things. I've had people just complain, like, I feel like everything is slow and spotty, and it's like, we need to drill down on that. Like, I don't really know, like, this could be anything. And it's like the first we're hearing of it, and you've been upset for a while. So it's like, I'm sorry, like, you've been struggling. Yeah.
I got to tell you something about this that's very like on point with this too. I had enrolled a customer into Addigy recently, and one of the things they said, for two things. One day they're like, we noticed ever since you enrolled us, we're getting a lot more spam. I'm like, no, that's not at all. That has nothing to do with what we've done here. And they're like throwing it on me. Is ever since you put your tool on here, we got all this spam. I'm like, oh my God. This is the frustrating part. Is like, right. No, one has nothing to do with the other, but they equate the two somehow, because maybe they got an uptick of phishing or spoofing messages. So that's the challenge that we have to deal with the people that are uninformed, and not by because they're dumb, because they don't know the technology part.
Right. Yeah, everybody's looking for the easy button in general too, right? Everybody, and I get it. Even if we go back to Apple Business Essentials, they're essentially, I think, high level promising an easy button, but in actuality, like, if you look at the OS patches that are out there, the CV vulnerabilities, the 0-day exploits, they're only patching the latest OSs. Yeah. Like, day after day, they're doing less patching of any previous version of the OS. So you've got to get people up to the latest version. And then most organizations are not fully, there for a lot of reasons. And again, those like Business Essentials is only focusing on working and managing the upper end OS. So a lot of what we have to do is make sure the magic works at all levels of OSs out there in the field. Patching was only robust with system level commands up until recently. Even the MDM patching is still pretty, they're still working through some of the kinks. So you got to be able to orchestrate which ones you do at the right OS levels. Anyway, getting off on a bit of a tangent, but to your point, the making sure that we can understand where their feelings are at. We're always dealing with antivirus issues where they believe the antivirus is never to blame on the Apple device. And somehow it might be the MDM, and it's just a little interesting.
Yeah, a lot of interweaving complications. I mean, like in that case that you described, Sam, it's like correlation is not causation, number one. And also, like, this is not even correlation. You just tying a couple things together, like spam goes up and spam goes down, and it really has nothing to do with. Like,
but as frustrating as it might be, Sam, at least you know about it. You're managing those expectations and that information. If 2-3 months went by and that sentiment by themselves just continue to build, you might have had a more frustrated customer. Going back to the earliest conversation, then you're dealing with breaking contract and negative sentiment and everything. So just being ahead of it is the most important thing.
And then tying back in, the whole updating thing that became kind of a mess at some point a few years ago, a couple of years ago anyway, and is kind of getting better, but there's still some complications to it. Apple's workflows just stay on the latest OS and it's handled. But if you have somebody on what in theory is still a supportable OS, Catalina, I mean, I haven't heard otherwise, or even Big Sur, it should be supportable. But if you just want to update Big Sur for a very large set of users, you're just directing them to software update, which, is basically Apple's way of marketing Monterey, which I also don't necessarily fault them for. There's a lot of benefits to their overall platform to get people on the latest OS. But if we have reasons, not to, maybe just because we're not ready to have them go through that process yet, and they just want the faster version of a quick update to Big Sur, we have to handle that for them. And talking about who's to blame, we describe, that this is something Apple is working on and they kind of broke it. And I try not to say like, Apple made our life much harder and more annoying for no good reason. I actually appreciate a lot of what Apple's been doing for the last number of years. Going back to the days making screen recording or making accessibility, something that the user had to explicitly enable, I think that's such a good thing. Even though it's annoying and it makes our life a little bit harder, I think that's a really good thing. I recently connected to a Windows machine and I was like, this is going to be easy. I don't have to walk them through anything. And I don't know if the later versions, the newest versions of Windows changed that. Sam, you might know better than I do. Has that changed in the latest version of Windows? Do you have to explicitly jump through hoops to gain remote access to a Windows machine in TeamViewer, for example?
I don't know how I became the Windows guy in this conversation at all. But I don't honestly know the answer to that question. I'll be honest with you.
You can't be that much of a Windows guy because you don't hate Apple with a passion. So I guess you're not fully Windows guy, but I just know on Windows, it's easier. And I think that works against Windows and against the overall security of the platform. And I really think that Apple was a little bit ahead of the curve with all of these 0 days that have been constantly coming out for the past 2 years. Their system is inherently more secure at a foundational level. They deserve all the criticism they get for being late to patch things sometimes, and especially the older macOS versions. I do think that that's the right move, is to gain more control over everything, including software updates. It just makes our life harder in the meantime, but I think it's in service of greater security overall for the industry, specifically the Mac ecosystem.
The speed with which they work and end-of-life things, end-of-lifing Fleetsmith, they end-of-life from kernel extensions to everything else. There's disruption involved in that. But in the end, they're moving at a pace that gets us faster to where we need to be. And there's two sides of that coin overall. So patching is going to get a lot more stable very quickly. It may feel like 2 years, but it's only been a year. It's a hard scenario for us because we need to make sure people realize when that stuff started breaking, our customers were pointing their fingers at us. We knew quite well. We were trying to be explicit about it, but you don't want to be this vendor that's always bashing the tools that you support. We got to be very clear about it, and we don't have a super clear resolution of when it's going to happen. All they really do is they use MDM to call the local software update command line utility, but they just made it so only that was the ability that could call it. And then if it was called on an Intel versus M1, it would, I think, huge oversight with how they did it overall. But they're moving fast. I'm hopeful, and I think we got WWDC coming up here really soon. While there's a lot of expectation for what they may want to try to do because they're tackling so much of business essentials and really getting things a lot more robust. I think luckily for the last 4 years, we're going to see a more conservative release, which will be good for all of us.
Nice. The no new features releases we've been all clamoring for a while.
Yeah, I don't even know new features, but it'll be definitely lighter features. It just won't be the same kind of OS cycle. When we go into it in September with the new OS, that gets really scary for most organizations. The nice thing that we've gotten into as well too, and I think this is important for people to know because they don't really hear about this a whole lot. You hear about 0-day support from some vendors, but that's a scary situation because for us, as soon as WWDC hits and there's some beta, some alphas and betas available, they're immediately showing up at Addigy production, and we're already collecting a tremendous amount of statistics on it. So as we get towards the official release date, we have thousands of hours of different testing and validations are done in production that seamlessly just work versus upgrading your management platform for 0-day support, and then you got another 40 bugs you're pulling in with it too. So we have a lot of confidence in our abilities with the new OS has come out. We've gotten really good in the processes and the repetition, no matter what continues to get thrown out.
Yes, looking forward to it. Well, what else can we look forward to as we kind of wrap up the conversation, Jason? Specifically in the world of Addigy, what's newest on your radar?
Yeah, I mean, we're continuing to work heavily in the different areas of security. So whether it's Microsoft InTune conditional access, we're deploying their new compliance engine. We're the first ones on it this quarter, as well as we work very closely with Okta and some of the other next-gen compliance engine utilities where we can just keep it simple, seamless, in check at all times. That's one of the mantras we've been able to keep hold of is just making sure that we keep that system at the right given state at all times, and just keeping the team very focused on the innovation we've put out this year thus far and building on it. We were really lucky to have won the Inc. Best Places to Work Award, and it just shows our level of culture, and I think hopefully our customers feel our dedication, our commitment, not only in building product, but supporting our customers and helping them. So we're excited. It's continuing to be a great year. Just we keep building great organizations just like you guys do.
It's reflective in the way your team works. Everyone in your organization seems to do their job in earnest. And anytime there's ever been an issue where I've had to file a ticket, or even on the Mac admin Slack or through your Slack channel, there's always been quick response, and not just from one person on your team, but many. And they all take it to heart, and they really want to drive the product and keep on moving it forward. And that's really clearly evident.
Yeah, we celebrate that. One thing that I try to do as much as I can, like we actually brought one of our most talented success engineers up to development. And it's really important to make sure that we just don't bring even a talented engineer in and just say, hey, start working away. This person's worked for 9 months with customers and really understands what they're trying to do, even what their challenges are. Nothing's ever perfect. So they really intimately understand as they're writing code, what do we really want to make sure that we're helping to do? We can define that, we can write it in requirements, but it's a different thing when people really viscerally understand the needs and what people are trying to accomplish.
Yeah, I'll second what Jerry said. I mean, you have an awesome team, Jason. It's no surprise you won the Inc. award for one of the best places to work. And I don't think there's any luck involved. I think it's just the way you run the company and the way you foster that solid company culture. I mean, it just shows in all the interactions I have as well, with support, whether through email, which makes it really easy to get support, Mac admin Slack, the channel, as Jerry mentioned, you can oftentimes get a quick answer, not only from your Addigy support team that maintains a presence there, but also from the community. I mean, zooming out to, the broader ecosystem around Addigy, you have some really solid people like contributing the work that they've done, scripts that they've created and workflows that they've created and things they've learned about MDM and just specifically Addigy. And they share that knowledge, whether it's a blog post or just one-on-one personal help in the Slack or through email or other channels. I've had direct messages from your team. It just shows. And that's one of the greatest things about working with a company is when the people that you're interacting with are pleasant, helpful, and like Jerry said, just really earnest in their job. So I just commend your team, especially the support people I've interacted with. Thanks for doing a good job stewarding this project along to be such a helpful thing we can use in the Mac admin community. So thank you very much, Jason.
It's humbling. One of the first things, I started Addigy out of my spare bedroom, right? It was just me, and then able to hire my second engineer, my third engineer, and bootstrap the business. Culture definitely, at least early days, started with me. When you see it grow past you, like I play less and less of a role in the company culture, which becomes more powerful that way because you have handed a torch along in many different ways, and that manifests. So that's probably the most humbling experience, to watch people continuing to develop what is the culture. And my head of support a couple of years ago, he would say to me, well, how do you take the risks of people doing these things? But we have to give people opportunities. And when they do, and when they succeed, and you're continuing to adopt that, it manifests. So I'm humble, but I hope everybody continues doing the same thing. Money doesn't buy everything these days, especially in our economy.
Right on. Well, I think if it's probably a safe bet if you sent out a survey to your team, you'd get all thumbs up across the board. So thumbs up from us as well.
Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate it.
Thanks again, Jason Dettbarn, founder and CEO of Addigy. Everybody check out addigy.com. Thanks again, Jason.
Thank you.
Jerry does his voices of customers of all kinds.
Am I on the cloud?
Joe spins his deeply detailed yarns all the time.
I have a whole story about this.
Sam is on the road again, phoning in from a hotel.
At least we know where I am.
Half a century combined of Apple expertise right now. My Mac is slow.